John Carpenter's Halloween changed horror films in 1978. There's absolutely no denying that. Without the 1978 classic, we would have no Friday the 13th, likely no Nightmare on Elm Street, and certainly no Scream. At least, these films wouldn't have been clamored over and given the opportunity to succeed if Halloween hadn't slashed a new path for a modern kind of monster. How then did such a groundbreaking story become such a convoluted mess? With Halloween's 40th anniversary and the upcoming reboot, sequel, requel, whatever you want to call it, I figured it's a perfect time to revisit the series we love and shed some light on how things got so far off track, how Halloween became a fractured franchise. While developing a film called The Babysitter Murders, producer Irwin Yablans had a revelation that would transform his run-of-the-mill exploitation film into something special. No horror film up to that point had been centered around or titled Halloween. The new name and setting afforded new creative and marketing possibilities to an already relatable story of babysitters being stalked by the boogeyman. Until the late 1960s, horror films had largely remained rooted in Gothic traditions or preyed on our fears of technology. Then Psycho, The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Last House on the Left, and Black Christmas transplanted horror into modern times, providing fertile ground for John Carpenter's story about terror in our own backyard. Before the internet, it was easier to remain siloed in your own world, ignoring the ugliness that goes on outside. Press coverage of the Vietnam War poked holes in this idealistic beaver cleaver America as everyday people faced the harsh realities of a war abroad. Around the same time, urban legends of poison, needles, and razors in Halloween candy caused many to question the safety of trick-or-treaters and spurred paranoia in suburban neighborhoods. Americans were growing fearful of the evil that lurked just beyond their front door. John Carpenter used the holiday's dark roots to craft a boogeyman who was the physical manifestation of evil itself. Michael Myers was a flesh-and-blood psychopath, but more than just human. He was a force of nature, an ancient evil that existed long before the druidic traditions of sacrificial rituals gave way to children trick-or-treating in costumes. To further diminish his humanity, Michael was only referred to by name a few times in the script itself, instead being described as the shape of a man, or the shape. John Carpenter's Halloween is a perfect storm of creative elements: ingenuity, story, characters, casting, cinematography, score, and suspense, all colliding at just the right time. Though many of the tropes and gags seem cliché today, it was Halloween that popularized many back in 1978. Halloween's buzz slowly picked up steam in the few months following its release. Carpenter, who initially wrote the film off as a commercial failure, was surprised at the film's delayed success. It was a sleeper hit and would go on to become the most successful independent film ever made to that point, grossing $40 million in the US before raking in another $30 internationally, all on a budget of $300,000. Countless low-budget imitators were pumped out in Halloween's wake, including Silent Night, Deadly Night, My Bloody Valentine, and the wildly successful Friday the 13th. Halloween hadn't been just another low-budget horror film, but an iconic story that broke B-movie barriers, reinvigorated the horror genre, and created a new subgenre, the slasher. Other studios finding success with Halloween's formula motivated its producers to consider a sequel. Though executives were eager to bring back the shape, John Carpenter and Deborah Hill felt Halloween told a complete story and that catching lightning in a bottle a second time would be near impossible. Instead, they moved on to Escape from New York and The Fog. Then a legal issue arose regarding The Fog's distribution, and to settle, Carpenter agreed to produce Halloween 2. Michael Myers was back, but the battle was an omen of things to come. Instead of a traditional sequel, Halloween 2 would be a continuation of the original film. Michael would evade capture long enough to follow Laurie to a local hospital, with Loomis giving chase. While Carpenter agreed to write and produce Halloween 2, he would not sit in the director's chair. Rick Rosenthal was granted both a tremendous opportunity and a difficult position. His first feature was a sequel to a wildly successful film and placed him in between the competing direction of its creators and executives. To justify round 2, Carpenter conjured up an Empire Strikes Back style revelation that changed the whole trajectory of the series. Laurie Strode is Michael's estranged sister, thanks to a secret adoption after Michael was committed.
Jesus, don't you see what he's doing here in Haddonfield? He killed one sister 15 years ago, now he's trying to kill the other.
The Shape was primed for a return, but a gigantic hurdle stood in his way. Though its focus on suspense over bloodshed was the key to its success, countless imitators that were churned out after Halloween sold on gore and cheap thrills. The violence grew more excessive with each new film, and Friday the 13th led the trend. Team Carpenter's early reluctance to take on the project was a justified one. How do you pull off a Halloween in an era where Halloween just won't work? As Rick Rosenthal worked to maintain the atmosphere of the original Halloween, Carpenter attempted to compete with modern horror films by adding additional scenes for suspense, cutting others for pacing, and beefing up the bloodshed. What we got was more intensity, more kills, and a sequel that fit in better with the climate of the 1980s. The film was a success, grossing $25.5 million during its US release. It was Halloween enough not to disappoint, and violent enough to compete with the other horror entries of the era. To avoid continued sequels, Carpenter crafted a definitive end to the Halloween story. Loomis and the Shape go out in a literal blaze of glory, burning to death in an explosive finale. Though the story was over, Halloween 2 helped foster the slasher craze. Friday the 13th and others continued building their franchises, and the success was once again noticed by Halloween higher-ups. Immediately after Halloween 2's release, talks of another installment began, much to the dismay of Team Carpenter. If Halloween 2 had been near impossible to pull off, why even attempt Halloween 3? Hill and Carpenter had been forced into producing Halloween 2 over legal issues with The Fog. This time, no such leverage existed. They agreed to return for Halloween 3 if it was completely unrelated to Michael Myers. Instead, new films would be released each Halloween as an anthology based around the holiday. Halloween 3 Season of the Witch would tell the story of an ancient Celtic witch disguised as the owner of a toy company. His masks, the most popular of the season, were rigged with a blend of ancient witchcraft and modern technology that killed whoever wore the masks and those around them. The film was almost universally regarded as one of the worst of the original series by critics and audiences alike. Halloween 3 was the lowest grossing entry to that point, only earning $15 million at the box office. Trying to release a throwback to body-snatching horror of the 1950s during the pinnacle of the slasher era was a risk that proved near fatal to the franchise. Though blame for the creative misfire lies with Team Carpenter, the studio may have mishandled audience expectations. Aside from a feature in Fangoria and other horror rags at the time, little effort was made to tell the general public that the next Halloween wouldn't be about the guy that drove the previous films. Many felt using the established name to draw in audiences to an unrelated film was a bait and switch. Though it's amassed a cult following since its release, the film was so poorly received that it killed the entire anthology concept and halted any discussions of a sequel for 4 years. This set the wheels in motion for Team Carpenter to walk away from the series they helped create, and nearly killed the franchise altogether.